Happy Sabbath, everyone. This is a departure from the normal. And I know that for many people, this is a little bit odd. But I want, first of all, Thursday morning at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I thought, what did you agree to? And I was like, then I saw an email from Pastor Rose kind of cementing it. And I'm like, it's too late to back out because he's already made the deal, formal. So I said, okay, Lord, guess we're gonna do it. And then the soberness of the moment kicked in. Even though we're talking about the 7 habits, something that I've spoken with kids, about, because the 7 habits is something that I really enjoy watching form in kids. And so to have a 5-year-old be able to use and access the language, it's always fascinated me to see how we could talk about habit development and character development with kids. So while that is not new, the opportunity to talk about it in this setting, knowing it's not just about what we do, it's knowing that God is Lord of our habits. And there's a soberness that comes with it. And if I'm honest, I got to tell you that talking about habits, I'm not particularly an expert in it, because as we ended 2023, I found myself in the rubbles of where my own habits landed me, and habits that I have to come face to face with saying I have to unlearn. So I'm not up here because I'm an expert on habits, good habits, but because I stand in need of forming new ones and knowing and asking Him, don't give up on me yet, and knowing that He won't give up on us. So I don't know where you find yourself today. If you find yourself in the midst of having nicely packaged habits that we're now 6 days into the new year, and maybe these 6 days you've set intentions and you set all these resolutions and you're well on your way to making them, or maybe you are in the rubbles of those habits and you still haven't made it yet, and you're like, I've just given up on resolutions, I'm not going to worry about intentions. Wherever you are, He is Lord of those habits. Because how many people know we all have habits? And some of them are so involuntary almost. We go through the day and we are a product of our habits. We're not even thinking about the habits. And sometimes if you think of some of the habits and you go, how did that habit get started? The other day I told my husband I noticed I was biting my lip. And I don't know if I was anxious about something, but it had been going on for a couple of days. And I said, that's a habit that's forming. Watch that. Watch what triggers that, why you do that, and what do you need to do to undo that. But there are other habits that we have that are far more insidious. They creep up, but they're powerful. They almost go unseen at first, and then they grab us. And before long, we're down a path that we say, how did I get here? Started with habit. And today, we're going to talk about growing forward, navigating our habits and our hang-ups, because God is the Lord of those two, right? So Brother Wesley has been gracious enough to remind me to turn this on, the clicker. And so if I am ahead of myself and I don't realize, I need to look here and go forward with that. So Brother Wesley, help me out a bit, okay? All right, so as we talk about navigating our hang-ups and our habits, let's start by looking at a question. And Brother Wesley, it has me stuck for a bit. I don't know if okay, yes. It says, if asked to choose and celebrate one positive or impactful habit that you've cultivated over time, what would you choose? Now, I'm a teacher by trade, so I know this is not the setting where you're going to be answering back and forth, but I at least want you to think it through, right? So in this moment, if I had to ask you to choose one habit that you found to be a positive or impactful habit that you've cultivated, what would that habit? Now, reach in your thoughts and grab that one that you would choose, and then think, how did you develop that habit? And as you're thinking through that, also, why did you develop that habit? Is there a story? Is there some kind of belief or principle that's tied to that habit? Can you think back to what started that habit? Why did you develop that habit? And remember, this is a positive habit. It's not like me biting my lip. It's a positive habit that you have cultivated. And you're thinking now, how did I develop that? Why did I develop that? And then how long did it take to develop that? And the answers are important, and while I'm not asking you to share, I think every habit has tentacles attached to it. And it's important that we reflect and figure out those components of them. And then, okay, let me keep going. I'd like for you to meet Greg. Now, this is a Zoom commercial, very appropriately. But while I'm watching my Nollywood movies, this commercial will pop up all the time. And there's this guy named Greg that shows up panicked, and you hear the representative saying, okay, he purchased a chair. And he purchased a chair with all the materials in there. And he's assembled his chair. And now he's panicked because this is what Greg has ended up with. And so he's calling tech support to figure out what went wrong. And so the person was casual until she got on the Zoom to look at what Greg's assembled project looks like. And she got panicked because how in the world does Greg assemble something that looks like that? That is certainly not a chair, right? It has all the makings of a chair, but it's not a chair. That was not the design, and Greg is panicked. But thankfully, Greg had the sensibility to call for help. So, as I mentioned earlier, the week may have started with intentions for us. Nobody wakes up in the morning to say, I think I'm gonna make a bunch of bad choices today. We don't do that, right? We wake up more times than not with an intention to do right. And sometimes, in spite of ourselves, we end up with Greg's chair. And we feel the panic. We feel the frustration. We feel the disappointment. And sometimes we don't do what Greg did. Sometimes we don't call for help. And we struggle in our mess. We don't have a chair. It lacks its utility. We've already invested in it, and we're stuck with it. Sometimes our habits leave us to a place of feeling stuck. And we've given it the best. Greg, I'm not going to be mad at Greg. That could have probably been me. I try to assemble things, and they don't always look the way I want them to. Sometimes we don't read the instructions. Sometimes we jump ahead of ourselves. But without blame, we end up with habits and designs and moments that leave us feeling like Greg. And what do? We call for help. And so, for some reason, I keep getting going back. So I'm not stuck. I keep telling myself I'm not stuck. Okay. Pulse check number 2. Which is easier? And you're not Greg right now, but if you were, which is easier, learning something new or unlearning something? And those of you on Zoom, I invite you to put your response, and the people in the audience, you can raise your hand, and if you don't want to be singled out, you don't have to, but let's try this. How many people think learning something new is easier? Is easier. Raise your hand if you think it's, okay? How many people think unlearning something is easier? Okay, we have one person for unlearning, and I'm not sure how many people are in the Zoom audience that voted for either, but you could still join in and put, if you think learning something new is easier, put that in. If you think unlearning something is easier, you can join our lone audience member here in the unlearning. And sometimes, I'm not going to tell you the answer, but I'm going to tell you the political answer, the lawyer's answer is going to be, it depends, right? That may be the safest answer, but you know when you're thinking of a habit that you want to unlearn for some habits, unlearning it is terribly hard. Harder than even learning a new habit to replace it. But in our habit formation, in our growing forward, we are going to have to unlearn a lot of things. And we're going to have to learn a lot of things. So whether it's easy or hard, we are going to have to be in that space where we're willing to embrace doing both, because it will require us doing both if we're going to grow. Agreed? And so as we think of that, the question then goes to, what is one habit you would like to unlearn or learn? So I asked you a habit that you wanted to celebrate, and a habit before that you cultivate and you're proud of that. And I asked you to think through, okay, how did I do it? Why did I do it? Now I'm asking you to think through, what's a habit that you would like to unlearn, or a habit you'd like to learn? You could choose one or the other. And then I want you to think of, why do you want to unlearn or develop that habit? Is there a story, a belief, or a principle that has prevented you from either unlearning that habit or learning that habit? And I'm gonna pause for about 10 seconds so that give you the space to think that through. We're thinking about a habit that you either want to learn or unlearn, and now you're thinking of, why do I need to do that? And is there something that has prevented me from unlearning that habit or learning that habit? Think it through. And when you have grabbed that out of your memory and out of your thoughts, hold on to that. Hold on to that habit. There's a reason God has allowed that to come to the surface and to your heart today. Don't brush it away. Now, the next question is, how would unlearning or installing this habit impact how you love, how you live, and how you serve? And as you think about that, there's an opportunity cost in staying where you are, right? We're giving up something precious by not being able to harness either the unlearning of that habit or the installation of that habit. Is it worth staying where I am? And as that God is speaking to your heart on that, let's talk a little bit about the power of habits. Stephen Covey says, simply put, habits are the intersection of knowledge, skill, and desire. At first I was like, desire? Yeah, even the habits that we form that are, we unconsciously form them, there is something that reinforces them, right? Why we continue to do them. And then there's an author of a book called Atomic Habits. He pushes about the fact that small habits are important, and habits are granular, they're atomic in nature. You start off small. And he says the small decisions you make each day and the actions you perform each day, those are your habits, repeated over time, and they're important to know. Here are a couple of thoughts that people have shared over time about habits. If there are some that resonate with you, grab onto which one of these that you prefer, and the one that kind of like stirs you. So as I read them, listen to them and find out which ones kind of like steer you in the direction to cement your ideas about habits. So people do not decide their future, they decide their habits, and their habits decide their future. And these are not gospel, these are opinions and quotes, but I chose ones that I thought were pretty consistent with the research and the theories out there, but you don't have to agree with all parts of it. All right, we first make our habits, then our habits make us. That one gripped me. We first make our habits, then they make us. How many of you have seen that in action? How many of you felt that in action? And then We are what we repeatedly do, whether we know we're doing it or not, because sometimes we don't know we're doing something. Everybody else could see it. We can't see it, but it's still a habit, right? We are what we repeatedly do. So on the flip side, excellence is not just an act, but it's a habit. It's repeated action. So if we are aspiring for excellence in an area, not perfection, but excellence, then it's a repeated pattern. Then we have the seed of every habit is a single tiny decision. It starts with the little things. And James Clear, who the author of Atomic Habits, said, the quality of your life depends on the quality of your habits. And of course, we all know that, I don't want to assume we all know this, but this is the middle quote is a little bit more common. Watch your thoughts, and you can repeat with me. Watch your thoughts, for they become your. Watch your. For they become. Watch your. For they become. Watch your. For they become. For they become your character, yes, and watch your. For it becomes your. That's powerful. So it starts with a thought, and now we're talking about destiny. And somewhere in the middle, it became a habit. But it started with a thought. Started with a thought. Habits are destiny altering. They can either be effective or maladaptive, but they're a habit none the same. Habits, the beautiful thing, and I'm so glad, even that song that says, "Don't give up on me yet," because habits are neuroplastic, meaning that they can be, our paths to those habits can be rewired. They can change. We are not stuck. Even the habit that you said you want to unlearn, you can do it. I can do it. Yesterday, my poor sisters had to deal with me saying, I'm sitting here eating a salad, pretending it's a burger. And I sat there and the sadness came over me because I was not enjoying the salad. And I sat there and one of my sisters said, "Sis, you've done it before." And then I'm like, oh, but I don't remember the Lord changing the taste of the salad to taste like a burger. But I'm like, if it happened before, change my palate, Lord. Change my want to, so it could match with my have to. The beauty of it, neuroplasticity of the brain says, yes, your habits, our behaviors, we're not stuck. Whatever has us in its vices, we're not stuck. And thank God that He can speak a word and it has to release me. Isn't that a beautiful thing? And the intentionality of when I surrender it to Him, I know He's in charge. And so I may start enjoying salads more. And that's basic, and I may be choosing a very trivial piece. And you may be saying, Nichole, I'm dealing with a much stronger vice. I'm not disregarding or diminishing it. Because if He can change my palate for a salad, He can change you from whatever vices has you. And so if it matters to us, it matters to our caring and loving God, because He desires for us to live free. So, habit formation, 3 phases, I'm told. Mr. Sharma says that it's 3 stages: deconstruction. And deconstruction is that unlearning, right? You're demolishing the old pathways that led you there. And then the second phase, he says, is installation. You're installing that new habit. And then that third stage is integration, where it starts coming together. And before you know it, they said it's around 60 or 66 days. Then it becomes a level of automaticity. That habit, now you have cleared up brain space, so you're not fighting your willpower. It becomes easier. And one author said it becomes easy. I'm not going to say it becomes easy. There's some habits that you will continually have to invest energy and thought into. But you find that after time, you invest less thought, right? So you cleared up enough space to now deal with other things because you've created this new pathway, and it's a better habit. A new pathway, you're growing forward, you're changing habits, and because you've invested the time and you've asked the Lord of our habits to intervene, now we have a new pathway to a better habit. So, Habit formation, there are 3 layers to it. What's that layer in the middle that you start out with, that the arrow is pointing to? Identity. So first, you have to, remember I asked you if there's a story or a thought that's tied to a habit? So knowing that starts with who I am, who I want to become, who's God calling me to become. If you start with the outcome, if you start with trying to change the behavior without going to tying it to who I am. If I'm going to try to eat this salad, it's because I have to believe that my body is a temple, right? And that I haven't always been a good steward of it. And I'm going to ask God, because he wants me to live alone. He wants me to live and live free and live abundantly, right? And he wants me to take care of me, because if I take care of my car, I need to take care of it, because I am the vehicle that he will be using, hands and my feet, right? So I got to take care of it, right? So there is that identity, because I'm a child of God, made in his image. That's the identity that I need to fall back on as I'm looking now at the process to get the better outcome. Make sense? So when you're looking at habit formation, those layers, it starts with identity. And that's why I believe that how can, as a believer, I not tap into that? Because that's powerful. I may struggle with it, but I serve the God of the universe. I am not stuck. All right, so our identity, this is how we know that we live in him. So 1 John 4:13 through 15. I started going back to memorizing scriptures, right? And I realized when my niece and my nephews were memorizing scriptures, and I was like, what? I was struggling to remember some, so I'm like, I'm going back, and I can only do one. I've only done one in 1 week, but so that 1 John 4:15 was the one I memorized, and I did 2 weeks on it, just picking it apart. And it says, if anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them and they in God. Now this seems simple and we've read it before, but as I struggled recently to try to kind of recalibrate, you know what God brought to my attention? You've acknowledged Jesus Christ as the Son of God. I said, yes, Lord, I have. Then God lives in you, and you are in him. Do you really think he's going to leave you alone to struggle with this, Nichole? And so I kept on going back, and I kept on saying, God lives in me, and I'm in him. I am not alone. So that's a part of my identity. And then this other piece came in, and the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy with maladaptive habits, right? But what did he say? He said, I have come that they may have life. I have come that you may have life. He has come that I may have life and have it to the full. So that's my identity. And then we talk about what we just read earlier when we're talking about the freedom to which God has called us, and that it's not just to live free and abuse that. But when you look down to verse 22 and 23, it says, and this is from the Message version, it says, what happens when we live God's way? He brings gifts into our lives, much the same way that fruit appears in an orchard. Things like affection for others, exuberance about life, serenity. We develop a willingness to stick with things. Stick with things like habits. Oh, okay. All right. Stick with things, a sense of compassion in the heart, and a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people. We find ourselves involved in loyal commitments, not needing to force our way in life, able to marshal and direct our energies wisely. The fruit of the Spirit. I can live an abundant life. I can live free. And so as we think of all those things, our identity, it compels us to say, what does a life with effective habits look like? Now, by all means, these 7 habits, and even Stephen Covey has an 8th one about using your voice, but these 7 habits, this is a mental model that's nicely packaged that, like I said, it's accessible to people of all ages to be able to say these 7 habits. And this is just an overview. The first three habits of being proactive, to begin with the end in mind, and putting first things first, those are private victories. They're the inside job. And then habits 4, 5, and 6. Habit 4, think win-win, collaborating well, right? And then habit 5, seeking first to understand, then to be understood, and synergizing. Those three are about public victory, that's interpersonal leadership, how we interact with other people. And then habit 7, about sharpening the saw, is how we renew ourselves so we can go back and do all of that, right? So the overview, I've told you earlier that I've had students, when I was with elementary students, they would say, I'd have one student who, as an example, would say, okay, so-and-so didn't finish their work before recess. And just to hear them say, well, he didn't put first things first. And the kids they cultivate, and they're like, they ask what you're gonna do. Like, they'll say, one student said, well, he wasn't being proactive. He has a very, very bad mindset. He's not, you didn't pass the test, and goes, I fail everything in life. And someone's like, no, that's not being proactive. They correct each other. So if 5-year-olds can do that, I would say it's a habit that we can cultivate. So as I'm looking at the 7 habits, let's just run through them. And I'm gonna be honest, there's some that are my favorite, right? So I will rest a little longer on habit 1 and possibly habit 5, okay? Habit 5 is my absolute favorite. Okay, so habit 1, be proactive. Be proactive is more about the mindset, not being reactive, but being in charge of the attitude, our perceptions, correcting those things. Have you ever met somebody that's always blaming everybody else? Now, sometimes other people are to be blamed, right? But habit 1 says you have more control than you really know. Because we're in Christ. He lives in us, and we're in him. And we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, right? So you didn't pass that test. How is it everybody else's fault, right? As a teacher, I used to get the most creative, parents, by the way, this is my plug for teachers. When your child comes home and tells you the most outlandish story about that teacher, I want you to pause. Believe your child, but I want you to pause and say, tell me more. Because usually there is more, right? So when they say they didn't pass that test because that teacher never taught it, have you ever seen that meme that it says, yeah, they stopped saying they didn't teach that in school, they taught it, you just weren't listening? I keep saying amen to that. But proactive people take responsibility and ownership. Now, I'm not asking you to take ownership over things that you didn't do, because that's not healthy. But if there is 1% ownership, not blame, because we don't even for yourself, don't condemn. When our hearts condemn us, God is greater than our hearts. So I'm not asking you to self-condemn. Ownership and responsibility are different from blame. Ownership says, Lord, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Can you help me? Blame says, I just can't do anything, or you are the one who does it all the time. If you didn't say, I've heard people say, if you didn't say that, then I wouldn't have said that. You made me mad. No. I chose to respond that way. I chose to respond that way. God help me. That's a proactive mindset. And as we see a case study of 3 people that I wanted us to look at, because when we look at the barriers to being proactive, shame. A lot of times when we have lived a life of shame over and over and over again, the reason why I cannot even take responsibility here is because I can't take one more. I can't take responsibility for one more thing because I'm filled up with shame. My capacity is up here. So what do I do then? I deflect and I push it back on everybody else because I can't absorb it anymore. It's not that, do you see where that leads? And so when we look at people like Cain in Genesis 4, 1 through 5, or 1 through 15, I'm not going to read all of it, but if you can go there and we can skim through a little bit. Cain in Genesis chapter 4, 1 through 15. Cain had the opportunity to come face to face with his foibles and his shortcoming. He had presented a sacrifice and it wasn't accepted. Cain got upset. Not proactive, right? Not proactive, and not only did he get upset, he invited his brother to the field. So do you see the intentionality, the escalation of when we don't deal with our own issues and take responsibility? If you didn't meet the standard, God's standard, who else is the standard maker? How are you going to argue and be mad at God and now say, okay, since you didn't like my sacrifice, I'm going to just invite Abel to the field, and then he killed his brother. He had yet another opportunity where God reached out to him. Think about it. He murdered his brother, and God still reached out to him and gave him an opportunity, still an opportunity to take responsibility and to ask for help. He got upset. And he said, when the Lord says, why are you so angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. So it's as if God was saying, but you can master it, right? And he's like, you must. And what did Cain do? Now Cain said to his brother Abel, and he killed himself, he killed Abel rather. Let's go out to the field, and while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? And what did Cain say? I don't know. Are we taking ownership? Nope, still not doing it. Am I my brother's keeper? I'm deflecting yet again. And the Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to you from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. And Cain, you would think he said, oh Lord, I'm so sorry. No, he says, man, my punishment is too much for me. Today you're driving me out from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer. He's more concerned about whom? Himself. He's displeased God and he's killed his brother, and reactive as always, he didn't learn. And then we think of Esau. Now Esau, the story of Esau in Genesis chapter 27 compels me. If you go there with me, I saw something about 7 years ago in this passage that I had never paid attention to before. So we have Esau has been tricked, right? Tricked by Jacob. And then he realizes that his birthright, that's it. And he said, Esau, he came back from the field, and in verse 30, he realized that, as soon as his brother left, Jacob left, Isaac had already blessed Jacob. And when Esau came in, he says, who are you? And in verse 32, he says, I'm your son. He answered, your firstborn. Isaac trembled violently and said, who is it then that hunted game and brought it to me? Okay, we know the story. If you drop down to verse 34, when Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me too, my father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing. Esau said, isn't he rightfully named Jacob? He has deceived me these 2 times. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing. Then he asked, haven't you reserved any blessing for me? It breaks my heart every time I read that, because even though Esau was not doing what he was supposed to do, I felt his pain. It's like, don't you have any blessing for me, Father? And then Isaac answered Esau, I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine, so that what can I possibly do for you? Esau said to his father, do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father. Then Esau wept aloud. And here's where something jumped out at me. Then Esau, when he wept aloud, his father Isaac answered him. Listen to this. Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness. Yeah. Away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword. Yep. And you will serve your brother. Well, watch that. But when you grow restless, other versions say, when you decide, you will throw his yoke from off your neck. You are not stuck. What Jacob did was wrong. He hurt you. What they said was so wrong. And you could have that bitter cry like Esau. But when you decide, you can throw their yoke off your neck. I had not seen that until about 7 years ago. We get to decide, even with the hurt, even with the pain. And yes, the consequences may be there. But if he says we get to decide, we are no longer enslaved to that. And look what happened when Esau met Jacob again. Jacob was nervous, but Esau's like, he hugged him. I don't know if that means he fully threw the yoke off his neck, but what happened was he didn't anymore seem held to that yoke. He was able to greet his brother in love. So that's a lesson in being proactive. Our mindsets have to change, right? And then of course with Joseph, and I'm not going to read that, but Joseph met his brothers who did him wrong. And then in verse 50, even after he told them, I'm okay, we're good. Verse 50, after his father dies, they're like, okay, we're nervous. Is he going to get back at us? And he said, I told you. The passage said he reassured his brothers. He said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. My mindset is different. I am different. I am different. It no longer has me. It was wrong what they did. That you hurt me. And I'm not telling you it's okay, but I'm telling you we're good. And there's a difference, right? You're not excusing or condoning it, but we're good. It no longer has me. All right? And so those examples and case studies. Habit 2, and I'm going to skip through this in the essence of time, I'm sorry. Beginning with the end in mind, mapping it out. It's about godly planning and design. Living on purpose for his purpose, right? Habit 3, I mentioned that habit 3 and 1, 2, and 3 are about personal victories and your personal discipleship and personal leadership. Mastering personal management. I am horrible with this one in some respects. All right, my husband says, there's a little meme, he told me, he said, we're getting ready for something, and you just sit there and you think you can do all these other things tied to, I think I'm managing my time beautifully, and all of a sudden, it's time to leave, or it's time for me to have arrived, and I haven't left. And he doesn't understand that because he's the quintessential, need to be on time. So can you imagine the frustration? And I think I'm doing a whole lot of work, and I realize time has crept up. And so I'm going to work on that for sure. Habit 4, think win-win. Your success doesn't diminish mine, right? We can win. And this is not the mamby-pamby kind of like everybody gets a reward. No, that's not what it's saying. It's saying, I don't have to win at your expense. If I have to choose between being right and being kind, maybe I can live right, but I have to be right at your expense. Does it make sense? So think win-win. And when we think about what happened with Lot and Abraham, remember? Lot wanted, they were fighting, and Abraham said, we don't have to argue. Look in front of us. Yeah, and he didn't say it in a bitter way. He wasn't being like, okay, fine, you have it. He was just like, no, honestly, we're family. We can both win. Yes. And we're going to be okay. Habit 5 is my favorite. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. If I'm focusing on understanding your heart, I may feel misunderstood for a minute, but let me stop for a minute and hear your heart. Do you remember that passage in, I believe it's either, if it's not Judges, let me not even say it because the theologians will get me, where, do you remember the tribes that they had settled in, and they thought that they had erected an idol, remember? And then they were going back, they were ready to fight, and they come back ready, and they said, no, we're just doing this as a remembrance. We're not erecting idols. And they're like, oh, we're just good to know because we were going to wage war. And yes, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Habit 6, synergize. Some people think habit 6, synergizing, is just all holding hands and singing kumbaya. That's not just it. Habit 6 is acknowledging your unique talents, your limitations, my limitations, your limitations, and our differences. In light of all of that, how can we leverage those things to edify the body of Christ, where I'm authentically capitalizing on your giftings, and I am shoring up and protecting your limitations so that the body benefits? How am I doing that? That's true synergy. And then habit 7, sharpening the saw. The reason why I don't like to talk about habit 7, because I am horrible at habit 7. And in fact, some of my habits, my maladaptive habits, were cultivated by my lack of habit 7. So up there you see 7 types of rests that we all need. As you look at the types of rest, we have physical rest, mental rest, emotional rest, social rest, creative rest, spiritual rest, and sensory rest. Which one do you need right now? This is Sabbath, a day of rest, right? It's not just the physical rest and the spiritual rest, but what rest has your body and mind and soul been crying out for that you have not been giving it? As a steward of the body and the mind and the soul he's given you, listen to it. You could need multiple forms of these rests. I could pick off 3 of these rests that I need right about now. Yes, you may need all 7, yes. It's not lazy, it's not selfish to do these things, because how do we serve? We serve better when we allow him to replenish us and pour into us. So if I had to do my report card on these, and I'm not doing that, our North Carolina teaching instrument has different categories that you rate an element or standard. And you could say, not observed, we can't see a trace of that. And then the other category, it's developing. And then I deviated here because the next category for the teacher evaluation instrument is accomplished and distinguished. So I combine both of those to be mastered. So if you looked at all 7 habits, there's some you'll say, I've mastered that. And if we're honest, there's some we may say, not observable. Not even a trace of it. Wherever that finds you, no judgment. We're not stuck. Neuroplasticity, we can build those habits and we can change. I'll end with this story that God is the Lord of our habits. There's a story of the elephant rope. And the story of an elephant being tethered to a stake in the ground with just a small rope. And we realized that they were encaged and they weren't moving, right, as the story is told. And a gentleman who observed it said, they can just escape because by now these are massive animals who can just go like this and break free, but they were stuck there. And he said, what? These elephants can move. Why are they escaping? And the trainer says, you know what? When they were little, we tied them to the stake. And at that time, it was enough to keep them. But even as they grew up, they didn't realize they could break free. And they stayed tethered in the ground by a little rope that they can shake off in a heartbeat. He said, they don't realize that they can break free. What habits have us in their vices right now? And what habits have us with a voice saying, you can't break free? That it's bigger than you. Friends, it's a rope tied to a tether in the ground. And oh my God, we serve a chain-breaking God. We serve a God who lived and a Christ who died to save us and to set us free. And yet we're still stuck with a rope tethered to a ground by vices whispering in our ears that you're stuck. I won't always despise salads. You won't always lose your temper. You won't always feel bitter. we're not stuck. Because we are more than our past. We're more than our fears and our failures. We are what? Overcomers in Christ. Not just overcomers, but overcomers in Christ. And we know that we've been called to live victorious and what? Free. He is Lord, not only of our habits, but he's a redeemer of our hang-ups. How many have bad habits you need to break? How many have hang-ups? He is Lord of those. And I am so grateful that he is a redeemer of the time. He says, I will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. And if you notice in that passage, these were locusts that because of their own disobedience was sent upon them. It was punishment. It was justice. But even in spite of that, God said, I will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. Those bad habits, I can restore you. They're redeemable in this moment. He hasn't given up on us yet. 6 days in, and it doesn't matter what the calendar year is. It could be October, and we could say the same thing. He's the restorer of the years the locusts have eaten and the redeemer of our time. Father God, we just thank you that wherever we find ourselves, you are there with us. You are Jehovah Shammah. You are there, and you care. You want to get us unstuck. We're not tethered anymore because we're free in Christ. And who the Son sets free is free indeed. Amen.